The dress still smelled like his cologne. Not Taejin's. The other one's. Marcus's. Warm sandalwood and something synthetic underneath. The kind of scent that comes in a bottle from a department store and tries too hard to mean something. I noticed it the moment I stepped into the elevator of the Harlow Hotel. The fabric pressed close against my skin, and I thought, I should have changed. I should have changed before any of this happened. But I hadn't. And now, I was standing in the lobby of one of the most expensive hotels in Chicago at 11:15 on a Thursday night, wearing a burgundy dress I'd chosen for someone else, with nowhere to go and a phone that kept buzzing with texts I didn't want to read. The night had started simply enough. That's the thing about disasters. They rarely announce themselves. Marcus had called me that afternoon, his voice carrying that particular lightness that meant he wanted something. We'd been seeing each other for 4 months. Nothing serious. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. The way you tell yourself things that are easier than the truth. He'd asked me to meet him at Vela, a restaurant in River North I'd never been able to afford on my own. Dress nice, he'd said. So I did. I wore the burgundy dress with the low back and the gold zipper, and I curled my hair, and I took the train downtown, feeling like maybe tonight would be the night something actually shifted between us. It didn't shift. It collapsed. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at the bar with a glass of whiskey and a smile I'd seen before. The kind that's apologetic before a word is even spoken. He told me, carefully, gently, with the measured tone of someone who had rehearsed it, that he'd been seeing someone else for the past 6 weeks. Someone he worked with. Someone who, apparently, made things less complicated. I sat across from him for 11 minutes. I counted, because counting was the only thing keeping me from crying in public. And then I picked up my bag, and I left without touching the water they'd set in front of me. I walked 4 blocks in heels before I realized I had no plan. That's how I ended up at the Harlow. Not because I had a reservation or knew anyone there, but because its revolving door was the first thing that appeared through the blur of trying not to cry on Michigan Avenue, and the lobby looked warm, and I needed somewhere to sit that wasn't a bus stop. The bar inside was called 61. I'd heard of it, seen it tagged in photos on social media, always assumed it was the kind of place that existed for other people. People with money, or connections, or at least a reason to be there. I had none of those things, but I walked in anyway. The bar was quieter than I expected for a Thursday. Low lighting, dark wood, the kind of jazz that plays softly enough that you forget it's there until you need it. I found a seat at the far end of the bar, ordered a glass of wine I couldn't really afford, and tried to look like someone who had chosen to be alone rather than someone who had just been let go. I was doing a decent job of it, I think. Or at least I thought I was. The shift in the room happened before I understood what caused it. There's no other way to describe it. The air changed. The bartender, who had been easy and conversational, straightened almost imperceptibly. The 2 men at the table nearest the window stopped talking mid-sentence. Even the music seemed to recede, though of course it didn't. That was only in my head. I felt it before I saw it. A kind of pressure. The way a room feels just before a storm actually arrives. I turned slightly, the way you do when something pulls at you without explanation. He came in from a side entrance I hadn't noticed, flanked by 2 men in dark suits, who moved with the specific stillness of people trained to blend into walls. He was younger than the weight of his presence suggested, mid-30s at most, with dark hair swept back from his face, and the kind of bone structure that looked almost severe in the low light. His suit was black, perfectly fitted, collar open just enough to reveal the edge of ink crawling up from his chest toward his jaw. He didn't look around the room the way most people do when they enter a space, scanning for familiar faces, checking the environment. He simply walked in as though the room had already been arranged to receive him, which, I realized slowly, it had been. A table that had been empty moments before was now set. A server appeared from nowhere. The 2 men who'd been sitting near the window gathered their things quietly and moved without being asked. I looked back at my wine. Not your business, Isabella. I had enough of my own tonight, But the thing about presence, real presence, the kind that doesn't perform itself, is that it doesn't require your attention to occupy the room. I felt him the way you feel heat from something you're not looking at. I focused on the grain of the bar, on the stem of my glass, on the low ache behind my sternum that Marcus had left there. I thought about the dress. I thought about how I'd stood in front of my bathroom mirror for 20 minutes, deciding between the burgundy and the blue, and chosen wrong, apparently, in every possible sense. The wine was almost gone when someone appeared at my left. Not him. One of his men, the taller one, with a jaw like a right angle and eyes that gave away nothing. He set a fresh glass of wine in front of me without asking, without a word, and placed a small folded card beside it. Then he stepped back. I stared at the glass for a moment, then at the card. From the gentleman at table 4. He noticed your glass was almost empty. I looked up. Across the room, at the table that hadn't existed 10 minutes ago, the man in the black suit was watching me. Not with aggression, not with the leering attention I might have expected. Just watching. Still. Patient. The way something is patient when it already knows how things end. My heart did something I didn't have language for yet. I should have left the glass untouched. I should have paid my tab and gone home and cried into my own pillow like a sensible person. Instead, I picked up the card and turned it over. And on the back, in precise, unhurried handwriting, were 4 words. You look like fire. I set it down, picked up the new glass of wine, and made the mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was the first honest thing I'd done all night, of meeting his eyes across the room and not looking away. He didn't smile. He didn't raise his glass or nod or do any of the things men usually do when they think they've gotten something they wanted. He simply held my gaze for 3 full seconds, then returned his attention to the man seated across from him, as though I hadn't happened at all. And somehow that was worse. And somehow that was better. I pressed my fingers against the card and thought, I do not know what this is. I do not know who he is. I know that I'm wearing another man's cologne on my skin, and that tonight has already broken something in me. And I don't know if sitting here is bravery or stupidity, or just the particular recklessness that comes after grief. Outside, Chicago moved on without me. Cars and wind and the distant sound of a siren pulling somewhere urgent. Inside 61, the jazz kept playing low, and the man at table 4 never looked at me again that night. Not visibly, not in any way I could have pointed to and named. But when I finally stood to leave, my coat already over my arm, I felt it. The weight of his attention following me to the door like a hand almost touching my shoulder. Almost, not quite. I stepped into the revolving door and out into the cold, and I thought, that's it. That's the end of it. I was so completely wrong. I didn't sleep well. That wasn't unusual. I hadn't slept well in weeks. The kind of restless nights where your body lies still but your mind keeps moving through rooms you thought you'd already left. But that night was different. It wasn't Marcus keeping me awake. Somewhere around 2 a.m, I realized, with a clarity that embarrassed me a little, that I'd stopped thinking about him almost entirely. It was the card. 4 words written in black ink on hotel stationery, sitting on my nightstand because I hadn't thrown it away like I should have. You look like fire. I lay in the dark of my apartment on the north side, the radiator clicking its uneven rhythm against the wall, and I turned those words over and over until they stopped making sense and started making something else. Something warmer and less definable that I didn't want to examine too closely. I told myself I'd throw the card away in the morning. I didn't throw it away in the morning. Instead, I went to work. I was a contract coordinator for a mid-size event planning company called Ardent & Cole, which operated out of a glass-fronted office on Wacker Drive and specialized in corporate galas, private dinners, and the kind of fundraising events where people pay $1,000 a plate to feel generous. It was precise, detail-oriented work, and I was good at it. Good at managing vendors and timelines and the particular anxieties of clients who wanted everything perfect and didn't always know what perfect meant. I liked the clarity of it. A thing either worked or it didn't. A table was set or it wasn't. There was comfort in problems that had measurable solutions. My personal life, apparently, did not qualify. I got through the morning on coffee and professional muscle memory. My colleague Dara, who noticed everything and said most of it out loud, took one look at me at 10:30 and said, "Marcus?" And I said, "Done." And she said, "Good," without missing a beat, which was exactly the right response, and also made my eyes sting a little. I blinked it away. I had a vendor call at 11 and a site walkthrough at 2, and no time to fall apart before Thursday at the earliest. The site walkthrough was at the Harlow Hotel. I noticed this on my calendar at 11:53 and sat very still for a moment. It wasn't unusual. Arden and Cole worked with the Harlow regularly, using their third-floor event space for private dinners and small corporate gatherings. I'd done walkthroughs there before. It was a professional engagement, completely routine, and the fact that I'd been in their bar the previous night was entirely coincidental and entirely irrelevant, and I needed to stop sitting at my desk, staring at a calendar entry like it meant something. I gathered my things and went. The event space coordinator at the Harlow was a man named Patrick, efficient and pleasant, with the practiced calm of someone who had managed catastrophes with a smile and never discussed them afterward. He met me in the lobby at 2 and walked me through the third-floor ballroom, which was being configured for a private dinner the following week. 40 guests, seated with a specific request for a single long table rather than rounds. I took notes, measured sight lines, photographed the lighting rigs, and the kitchen access points. Normal, straightforward. I was good at this. We were finishing the walkthrough, Patrick explaining the hotel's new policy on outside catering vendors, when I noticed the stillness again. It came from the corridor to our left, a hallway that led, I assumed, to private conference rooms or executive suites. I heard it before I understood it. A silence that spread outward like something dropped in water. Patrick stopped mid-sentence. His eyes shifted slightly, a reflexive movement he didn't seem aware of making. I turned. Taijin was walking down the corridor toward the main hall, unhurried, one hand in his jacket pocket. 2 men flanked him at a slight distance, close enough to be present, far enough to suggest that he didn't require them. He was dressed differently than the night before, though no less precisely. Charcoal suit, white shirt, collar open at the throat, the tattoo at his neck visible in the afternoon light filtering through the hallway windows. He looked like someone who had never once moved through a space without owning it first. He saw me. There was no question about that. His gaze found mine the moment he turned the corner, with a directness that suggested he'd known I was there before he rounded it. Something in his expression shifted, barely, the way the surface of water changes before anything breaks through. Then he kept walking. He was going to walk past. I was sure of it. I was already turning back to Patrick, already reaching for my notebook with the specific intention of looking like a professional who had somewhere to be. He stopped, not in front of me, slightly to the left, speaking quietly to one of his men in Korean, his back partially turned. But that brief pause, that deliberate slowing, told me something I didn't want to know. He was aware of me in the way that certain people are aware of everything around them. Not out of interest exactly, but out of an instinct so deeply habituated that it had become a kind of gravity. Patrick said something I didn't catch. I asked him to repeat it. When I looked back at the corridor, Taejin was gone. I finished the walkthrough. I shook Patrick's hand, confirmed the timeline, walked to the elevator bank with my notebook pressed against my chest. Inside the elevator, I let out a breath I'd been holding for probably 3 minutes. The doors closed and gave me back my reflection. Composed, professional, burgundy dress nowhere in sight. Just a black blazer and flat boots, and the face of a woman who had absolutely no business feeling the way she was feeling about a stranger in a hotel corridor. I rode the elevator down. The lobby was quiet in the mid-afternoon way that hotels get, that particular hush between the checkout rush and the evening crowd. I was crossing toward the revolving door, head down, mentally drafting my vendor follow-up email, when someone stepped into my path. Not aggressively, just There. One of his men. The same one from the night before. The one with the right-angle jaw, standing with his hands clasped in front of him like he had all the time in the world, and no particular preference about how you spent yours. "Miss," he said, which was not a greeting, but a sentence in itself. I stopped. Mr. Shin would like to know if you'd join him for coffee. There were several things I should have said. That I had work to get back to, which was true. That I didn't know Mr. Shin, which was also true. That accepting coffee from men whose names I'd just learned from their bodyguards at 4 p.m. in hotel lobbies was not something I made a habit of, which was entirely true and had always served me well. "Mr. Shin," I repeated. "Yes." He couldn't ask me himself? The man's expression didn't change. He could, a pause that felt instructive. He prefers to know the answer first. I looked past him, toward the hotel's smaller lounge off the main lobby, a quieter room, leather seating, afternoon light through tall windows. I could see the back of Taejin's head, the clean line of his jaw in profile, a coffee cup on the table in front of him. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his phone, or maybe nothing at all, with the perfect composure of a man who had made an offer and was prepared to be indifferent to the outcome. He prefers to know the answer first. The pride in me that was still wearing a metaphorical burgundy dress, still sitting at a bar wondering what she'd done wrong, wanted to walk out. Walk out and get on the train and be sensible and uncomplicated for once. 10 minutes, I said. The man stepped aside. I crossed the lobby. I didn't look at the revolving door. I moved toward the smaller lounge with my notebook still pressed to my chest like a shield I knew was decorative, and when I reached the table, Taejin looked up from his phone, or from wherever his attention had been, and there was that same quality in his gaze from the night before. Patient. Unhurried. Like he was reading something in me I hadn't chosen to show. He didn't stand. He gestured to the seat across from him with 2 fingers, a movement so minimal it barely qualified as an invitation, and yet somehow there was nothing rude about it. It was simply what it was. I sat. "I didn't think I'd see you again," I said, because it was true, and because saying true things felt safer than whatever silence he would have been comfortable with. He looked at me for a moment. "I know. Is that why you sent the coffee invitation through your—" I paused, not knowing what word to use. "Through Min," he said. Flat. No apology in it. "Through Min," I agreed. A server appeared and set a cup in front of me without my having ordered anything. I looked at it. Oat milk latte, which was exactly what I would have ordered. I decided not to think about how that was possible. Taejin set his phone face down on the table. He looked at me the way people look at things they are deciding about. Not unkindly, but without the social performance most people layer over genuine attention. "The dress you wore last night," he said. It wasn't for me. It wasn't a question. I felt something tighten in my chest. "No," I said. "It wasn't." He nodded once, slowly. Like that answered something he'd needed answered. Like it mattered in a way I didn't yet understand. "It will be, eventually," he said. The lounge felt smaller. The afternoon light through the tall windows pressed warm against my shoulders. And somewhere behind me the city kept moving. Indifferent, enormous, full of people making sensible decisions. And I sat across from a man I didn't know, holding a coffee I hadn't ordered, feeling the specific and terrifying sensation of a life pivoting beneath my feet. I didn't argue with him. That frightened me most of all. 3 days passed before I heard from him again. I didn't expect to hear from him at all. That's what I told myself anyway, with the specific discipline of someone who has decided not to want something and keeps having to redecide it. I went to work. I returned vendor calls. I finalized the seating chart for the Harlow dinner and sent it to Patrick without letting myself think about the corridor or the lounge, or the way Taejin had said eventually, like it was a fact he'd already verified, rather than a presumption he was making. On the second day, I threw the card away. On the third day, I took it out of the trash, smoothed it against the edge of my nightstand, and told myself I was keeping it because it was a nice piece of hotel stationery and not for any other reason. Dara didn't ask. She was good at knowing when not to. The call came on a Friday afternoon, when I was standing in the Ardent and Cole kitchen, waiting for the coffee maker to finish, already thinking about the weekend and the leftover Thai food in my fridge, and the book I'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks. My phone showed an unknown number with a Chicago area code. I almost didn't answer. Isabella. Not a greeting, a confirmation, like he was checking something off a list. I recognized his voice immediately, low, even, carrying that particular cadence of someone who rarely needed to repeat themselves. "How did you get this number?" I said. It wasn't really a question. I already suspected the answer was something I was better off not knowing in detail. A pause. Not uncomfortable. "Are you free tomorrow evening?" I looked at the coffee maker. It was still brewing. "That depends." "On what?" "On what tomorrow evening means." Another pause, shorter this time. "Dinner. A private event. I have a table." Private event. In the world I worked in, those 2 words meant something specific, a level of access and exclusivity that most people navigated their entire careers trying to reach. A part of me, the professional part, the one that spent its days managing exactly these kinds of events, understood immediately what was being offered. The rest of me was standing in a work kitchen in flat boots, trying to remember how breathing worked. "I work in event planning," I said. "I know what private events look like from the service side." "I know." A beat. "This time you'd be at the table." I pressed my fingers against the countertop. Smooth, cool laminate. Something to hold on to. "Why me?" I asked. Because it was the real question, and I'd never been good at saving real questions for later. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was precise and without decoration. "Because you stayed for 10 minutes when you didn't have to, and you didn't pretend it was something else." I didn't have a response for that, or rather, I had several, and none of them felt sufficient. 7 o'clock, he said. "Someone will pick you up." He ended the call before I could agree or disagree, which I was almost certain was intentional, and which irritated me in a way that felt uncomfortably close to something else. The coffee maker beeped. I poured my cup and went back to my desk and spent the rest of the afternoon pretending to review contracts while actually thinking about what you wear to a dinner you don't fully understand, with a man you know almost nothing about, who somehow already knows the kind of coffee you drink. Not the burgundy dress. That much I was certain of. The car that arrived Saturday evening was a black Mercedes, spotless, with a driver who introduced himself as nothing and held the door open with the practiced patience of someone paid to be invisible. I got in. I was wearing a deep green dress I'd bought 2 years ago for a work gala and worn once. Long, simple, with a neckline that was elegant rather than deliberate. I'd chosen it carefully. I wanted to look like myself, whatever that meant. I didn't want to look like I was trying to be something for him. The drive took 20 minutes, ending in front of a building in the West Loop I recognized as a private members club, the kind with no signage on the door, and a guest list that existed in someone's memory rather than on paper. I'd coordinated a corporate dinner there once, 18 months ago. The staff had been impeccable, and the kitchen had made me sign 2 separate NDAs about the client list. Inside, the room was warm and low-lit. Maybe 40 people spread across tables set with the kind of quiet luxury that doesn't announce itself. No centerpieces trying too hard, no obvious opulence, just quality in every surface, in the heft of the silverware, and the weight of the glassware, and the way the servers moved without disrupting the air. Taejin was already there. He stood when he saw me, which surprised me. He was with 2 other men at the table, both Korean, both expensively dressed, both carrying that specific stillness I was beginning to recognize as a characteristic of his world. And they didn't stand, but Taejin did, and it was such a deliberate, unhurried gesture that it somehow carried more weight than if he'd crossed the room to meet me. Min, I recognized him now, materialized at my elbow and guided me to the table with a hand that never quite touched my arm. "You came," Tajan said. "You didn't leave much room for alternative outcomes," I told him. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like an acknowledgement. He pulled out the chair beside him, not across from him, beside him. And I sat, and the dinner began. The two men were introduced simply as June and Rayo. They spoke English fluently, conversation moving between both languages in a way that was natural rather than excluding. Though I noticed Tajan translated small things for me occasionally. A reference, a joke, in quiet asides that required him to lean slightly close. I could smell his cologne. Nothing like sandalwood. Something cooler, drier. Wood smoke and something mineral underneath. I noted this with more attention than I intended. The food was extraordinary. I complimented it, and meant it, and Tajan said only, "I told them what you'd like," which raised approximately 15 questions I didn't ask. June asked me about my work with what seemed like genuine curiosity. I talked about event logistics, about the particular challenge of managing 100 variables with no visible mechanism, making things look effortless from the outside. He listened attentively. Rio was quieter, watching more than speaking, with the kind of eyes that catalogued without commenting. Tajan said little during dinner, but I was aware of him at every moment. Not because he demanded it, but because he was one of those people whose presence has a kind of gravitational consistency, pulling at your attention even when they're not performing for it. When someone across the room laughed too loudly, I felt Tajan's posture shift, barely a millimeter of increased stillness, before the laughter died down of its own accord. I wasn't sure if that was coincidence. I was becoming less willing to assume coincidence. After dinner, June and Rayo excused themselves with the precise courtesy of men following an understood signal. I hadn't seen Tajan give one, but I was increasingly certain that didn't mean it hadn't happened. We were alone at the table, technically, though Min remained at a discreet distance, and two other men I'd catalogued earlier still occupied the room's periphery. "You didn't talk much," I said. I was listening. "To me?" He looked at me steadily. "Mostly to you." I turned my wineglass slowly between my fingers. "Can I ask you something directly?" He waited, which I took as permission. "What do you do?" I asked. Specifically. The pause that followed was thoughtful rather than evasive, or at least it presented that way. "Investments," he said. "Import and trade, real estate. That's the version for new acquaintances." His eyes held mine. "Yes." I appreciated the honesty of it, the absence of the elaborate second layer that some men would have constructed. He wasn't pretending the surface was the whole picture. He was simply indicating that the whole picture was not yet something being offered. Not yet. I was thinking in his vocabulary already. "And you?" he said. "Is there a version for new acquaintances?" "Not really. What you see is mostly what there is." I paused. "I'm a woman who wore a dress for the wrong person and ended up at a bar and made questionable decisions with hotel stationery." This time the corner of his mouth moved further. Still not a full smile, but I was beginning to understand that this was simply how he was. That expressiveness for him lived in increments, in the millimeter shifts that most people's faces skipped past. I found myself watching for them. The evening ended without drama, which itself felt notable. Min appeared with my coat. Tajan walked me to the entrance, hands clasped behind his back, unhurried, not touching me but close enough that the warmth of the proximity registered. Outside, the car was already waiting. At the door, he stopped. I turned to face him. He looked at me for a moment in that particular way of his, reading, measuring, present in a manner that most people weren't. "Next week," he said. "That's not a question either," I observed. "No," he agreed. I got in the car. I watched the door of the club close behind him through the window, the dark glass swallowing him back into whatever world he actually lived in, and I pressed my fingers together in my lap and tried to be rational about what was happening. I made it about 4 blocks before I stopped trying. By the time the Mercedes pulled up to my building, something had settled in me. Not peace exactly. More like the specific feeling of having taken a step off solid ground and discovered, mid-fall, that there was something beneath you after all. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it would hold. What I knew was this. I had worn that green dress for myself tonight. Chosen it for no one, with no one's expectations folded into the fabric. And somehow, that felt like the most dangerous thing I'd done yet. The following week became 2 weeks, and then 3. And somewhere inside that time, I stopped counting the days between seeing him and started simply living inside them. It wasn't a dramatic shift. That's what surprised me most. I'd always imagined that if my life ever changed in a significant way, I'd feel it arriving, like weather you can see building on the horizon. But this was quieter than that. It happened in accumulation. A dinner on Tuesday. A call on Thursday evening that lasted 40 minutes and covered somehow everything from the logistics of large-scale event planning to the particular loneliness of cities that never go dark. A car that appeared outside my office one afternoon when it was raining, without my having mentioned that I'd be leaving late or that the forecast had turned. I didn't ask how he knew. I was getting better at not asking questions I already understood the shape of. What I was less good at was the other thing, the persistent, inconvenient awareness of how little I actually knew about the world he moved through, and how much that world was beginning to press against the edges of mine. The first real indication came on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the West Loop dinner. I was at my desk working through a vendor contract when Dara appeared at the edge of my cubicle, with the expression she reserved for information she wasn't sure how to deliver. "There's a man downstairs," she said. I looked up. Vendor? Not exactly. She set her coffee mug on the cubicle divider and lowered her voice. "He's been standing outside the building since at least 8:30. Black SUV parked at the curb. He's not doing anything. Just standing." I felt something tighten in my stomach. Not fear exactly. More like recognition. "Dark suit?" I asked. Dara stared at me. "Isabella, it's fine. That is not a 'it's fine' situation. That is a 'explain immediately' situation." I thought about how to explain Taijin to Dara, who was sharp and practical, and had once described my romantic life as a series of reasonable choices that somehow produce unreasonable results. I thought about how to describe the private dinners, the cars, the coffee that arrived at tables already ordered, the way a room behaved differently when he entered it. "I've been seeing someone," I said carefully. "The man with the bodyguards." It wasn't a question. Dara had always been faster than the conversation. "He's protective," I said. "Isabella." She picked up her mug, looked at me for a long moment. How protective? I didn't have a clean answer. I'd been asking myself a version of that question for weeks, turning it over without landing anywhere definitive. Taijin was attentive in ways that could read as care, and in ways that could read as something with sharper edges, and the two things existed simultaneously without resolving into one, and I hadn't yet decided what I thought about that. "I'll handle it," I said. I called him at lunch. He answered on the second ring. "Isabella." "There's someone outside my office building," I said. "I know." The flatness of it, not defensive, not apologetic, simply factual, stopped me for a moment. "Taijin. I work in an office building on Wacker Drive. I go through a security-coded entrance. I'm surrounded by people." A pause. "There was a situation last night." "What kind of situation?" "The kind that doesn't involve you directly." A beat. "I want to keep it that way." I pressed 2 fingers against my temple. Outside my office window, Chicago moved in its usual indifferent rush. Cabs and pedestrians, and the glittering banality of a city that didn't care about anyone's complications. "You can't put someone outside my office without telling me." "I should have told you." Stated plainly. No performance of remorse, but genuine acknowledgement. "I'll have him move to less visible position." That's not... I stopped, breathed. What situation? Silence on his end. Not absence. He was there. I could feel it. The quality of his attention traveling through the phone like pressure. Someone made an inquiry about you, he said finally, through channels that suggested they were looking for leverage. The floor felt slightly less solid than it had a moment ago. Leverage on you. Yes, because of me. Because of their perception of what you mean to me. I sat with that for a long moment. The word perception doing a great deal of work. And what do I mean to you? I asked, because I was apparently committed to asking the real questions even when the answers scared me. This pause was longer. More than is straightforward to explain over the phone, he said. Come to dinner tonight. I'll explain what I can. The dinner was not at a restaurant. The car took me to a building in River North, a converted warehouse, the kind that had been repositioned into high-end private residences over the past decade. The lobby had no front desk, only a private elevator that Min accessed with a key card. We rode to the 14th floor without speaking. The doors opened directly into an apartment. It was large and spare and surprisingly warm. Concrete floors softened by rugs I suspected were expensive without performing it. Bookshelves that looked genuinely used, windows across the entire south-facing wall that gave the city back to you in full. A kitchen where someone had clearly been cooking. The smell of it, ginger and sesame and something rich underneath, reached me before anything else. Taejin was at the kitchen counter, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows. The tattoos extended down both forearms, I saw now, intricate and dark and covering enough skin that they stopped reading as decoration and started reading as something more considered. Something permanent, chosen on purpose. He looked up. Sit, he said, nodding toward the kitchen island. I sat on one of the bar stools and watched him cook, which was not something I had anticipated, and which rearranged something in my chest without permission. He moved efficiently, without fuss, plating things with the same controlled precision he brought to everything else. He set a bowl in front of me. Korean braised short ribs, rice, something pickled and bright on the side. Simple, careful, perfect. I looked at the food and then at him. You cooked. Min offered to bring something. A pause. I preferred to do it myself. I didn't say anything to that. I picked up my chopsticks. We ate for a while before he spoke about the situation, measured, factual, giving me what I needed without dramatizing it. There was a rival faction, he explained, people who had reasons to test the edges of his world, and I had been noticed. Not targeted, noticed. There was a difference, and he was managing it, and he needed me to understand that the presence outside my office was not surveillance. It was a buffer. You should have asked me, I said again. Yes. I don't want to be managed, Taejin. I want to be talked to. He set down his chopsticks, looked at me with that focused, undeflecting attention. That's fair, he said. I'm not used to. He stopped. Started again. The people in my life don't usually require that kind of transparency. They operate within understood structures. I'm not one of your people. Something shifted in his expression. Subtle, but I caught it. The way his jaw changed. A brief tension. Something that looked almost like it hurt. No, he said quietly. You're not. The city glittered behind him through the south windows. 40 stories of light and movement. And I thought about leverage and perception, and the particular danger of becoming important to someone whose world measured importance in entirely different terms than mine. I'm scared, I said. Not ashamed of it, just naming it. I know. He held my gaze. I won't let anything happen to you. That's not what I'm scared of. He studied me, waiting. I'm scared of what happens to me if I keep choosing this, I said. If I keep showing up to dinners and getting into cars and letting you cook for me in your apartment, I'm scared of what I'm becoming okay with, what I'm starting to need. The silence that followed was the longest he'd given me yet, not avoidant, genuine. "What would you need from me?" he said finally, to make that feel less like a risk. It was the most open thing he'd said to me. The structure of it, not a statement, but an actual question, an invitation, something he was asking rather than deciding, landed differently than anything that had come before. I looked at him across the kitchen island, this man who rearranged rooms by entering them and sent bodyguards to stand outside my office and cooked short ribs on a Wednesday night rather than ordering in, and I thought, this is the moment. This is where I either step back or I don't. Honesty, I said. When something involves me, even tangentially, I want to know. Not the version that protects me from being worried, the actual version. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, once, with the weight of someone making a decision they intend to keep. "All right," he said, just that. But with Tajan, I was learning. All right carried the density of a contract. I picked up my chopsticks again. Across from me, he did the same. Outside, Chicago continued its indifferent, luminous sprawl, and inside this spare, warm apartment on the 14th floor, something settled between us. Not resolved, not simple, but chosen. Deliberately, eyes open, chosen. When Min arrived to take me home 2 hours later, Tajan walked me to the elevator. At the door, he paused. And then, for the first time, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. One gesture. Unhurried, his fingers barely grazing my jaw. He stepped back before I could respond. The elevator doors closed. I pressed my back against the wall of the elevator and stared at the ceiling and understood, with complete and terrifying clarity, that I was in love with him. Not falling, already there, already fully arrived. The way you sometimes reach a destination and realize you've been traveling toward it for longer than you knew. The lobby appeared. The city outside the glass doors waited. I walked through it carrying something new. I woke up in his apartment. Not the way I'd imagined it. In the abstract, distant way I'd occasionally allowed myself to imagine things about Tajan when my guard was down. I woke up fully dressed on his couch, a blanket over me that hadn't been there when I'd closed my eyes. The city outside those massive south-facing windows just beginning to turn from black to the deep bruised gray that comes before actual morning. My heels were on the floor beside me, placed neatly together. I didn't remember taking them off. The previous night came back in pieces. After dinner, I had stayed longer than intended. We'd moved from the kitchen island to the couch and talked, genuinely talked. The kind of conversation that doesn't follow a visible path but somehow covers enormous ground. He told me about Incheon, where he'd grown up. Not details about his work or his world. Just the city itself, the particular quality of winter there. A fish market his grandmother had taken him to every Saturday until he was 9. Small things. The kind of things that don't mean much on their own and mean everything in accumulation. I'd talked, too, about my mother in Atlanta, about the 2 years I'd spent after college, convinced I wanted to be an architect before understanding that what I actually loved was the organization of space rather than its creation. He'd listened with his full attention, the way he did everything, and at some point the warmth of the apartment and the lateness of the hour had pulled me under without warning. He'd let me sleep. That's what I kept returning to, sitting up slowly in the gray pre-dawn light. He could have woken me. He could have had Min drive me home. Instead, he'd put a blanket over me and let me sleep. And that quiet, unannounced act of consideration undid something in me more completely than anything else he'd done. I found him at the kitchen counter with coffee, already dressed. Dark trousers, white shirt, collar open. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway, and something in his expression shifted in that minimal way I'd become fluent in reading. Relief, maybe, or simply gladness, plainly felt and not performed. "You should have woken me," I said. "You needed the sleep." He set a cup on the counter in front of the second bar stool. "Sit." I sat. The coffee was perfect. I didn't ask how he knew. For a few minutes we existed in a silence that had nothing uncomfortable in it. The city waking up beyond the windows, the coffee between us, the particular intimacy of an early morning shared with someone before either of you has fully assembled your public self. I was aware of how I must look. Dress from the night before, hair escaping whatever I'd done to it, no armor of any kind. I found I didn't mind. That in itself told me something. I need to go home, I said eventually. I have work. I know. He didn't move to stop me. Didn't perform reluctance. But something in the set of his shoulders told me there was something he wanted to say, and he was deciding how. I waited. I'd gotten better at that too. The situation I mentioned, he said carefully. It's been resolved. I looked at him over my coffee cup. Resolved how? A pause. Permanently. I understood what that meant, and I understood that I was choosing, in that moment, not to ask for more detail, not out of avoidance, but because he had told me the truth, which was what I'd asked for, and the truth had edges I was going to have to learn to hold without cutting myself on them. That was the reality of this. I'd known it for weeks, and had been circling it, and now it was simply in front of me, honest and sharp, and requiring a decision. Is it over? I asked, the danger to me specifically. Yes. No hesitation. And you'll tell me if that changes. Yes, said the same way he'd said all right across the kitchen island, with the weight of someone who does not make promises lightly and does not break them once made. I nodded slowly. Set down my cup. Okay. He looked at me. That's it? What else would you like me to say? Something moved through his expression, not quite surprise, but adjacent to it, as though he'd prepared for an argument and was recalibrating to the absence of one. Most people, he said, when they understand what my life is, leave. I'm not most people. I held his gaze. And I'm not leaving. The silence that followed was different from all the previous ones, fuller somehow, like a room after a window's been opened. He came around the kitchen island slowly, unhurried, and stopped in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my chin up to maintain eye contact. He reached out and took my face in both hands, careful, deliberate, the same controlled precision he brought to everything, except that his hands were warm and his eyes were closer than they'd ever been, and I could see for the first time that there was something in them that wasn't controlled at all. He kissed me, quietly, without urgency, like he had all the time in the world and had been saving this particular moment for it. When he pulled back, he didn't go far. His forehead rested against mine. I don't know how to do this gently, he said, low, almost to himself. I want to. I'm aware that He stopped. That the way I am is not always easy to be close to. No, I agreed. It's not. He pulled back slightly to look at me, a question in his face that he hadn't put into words. But I'm not looking for easy, I said. I tried easy. Easy sent me to a hotel bar in a dress I'd worn for the wrong person. I held his gaze. You sent me a card, 4 words, and I kept it. Something in him settled then, visibly, physically, like a tension released from a structure that had been holding it for a long time. He pressed his lips to my forehead once, briefly, and stepped back with the clear effort of a man who understood that I needed to go to work, and was choosing to respect that over every instinct telling him otherwise. That restraint. That choosing. It was the most intimate thing he'd shown me yet. The weeks that followed were not without difficulty. That would be a lie, and I was done telling comfortable lies to myself. There were nights I couldn't reach him and didn't know why, and I had to sit with the fear that came with that and decide, each time, whether the fear was bigger than the trust. There were moments when I caught a glimpse of his world, a conversation that stopped when I entered a room, a look exchanged between Min and Rio that I wasn't meant to parse. And I had to make peace with the fact that I was loved by someone who carried weight I would never fully see. But he kept his word. Every time something touched the edges of my life, however tangentially, however resolvable before I'd even noticed it. He told me. Not the sanitized version. The actual version, delivered without drama, with the quiet matter-of-factness of a man treating me like someone who could handle truth. And every time I found that I could. He moved through the world differently with me in it. I noticed this gradually, then unmistakably. The possessiveness I'd felt from the beginning, that gravity, that attention, didn't diminish, but it changed shape. It became something that moved around me rather than over me. He was protective the way certain things are protective, not by restricting what you can reach, but by making sure nothing reaches you first. 4 months after that first morning on his couch, I was in the kitchen of his apartment making coffee badly. He had a machine that required more steps than seemed reasonable. When he came to stand behind me and reached past my shoulder to adjust the grind setting without comment, his chest against my back, his chin briefly at my temple. "I've been thinking," he said. "About the coffee machine? About you. Here." A pause. Permanently. I went still. The machine hummed between us. Outside, the city was doing its usual indifferent, gorgeous thing. "Are you asking me to move in?" I said carefully. "I'm telling you I want you to." A beat. "I'm asking if you want it too." I turned around inside the circle of his arms. He was watching me with that focused, undeflecting look, and underneath it, visible now, clearly visible, because he let me see it now in a way he hadn't in the beginning, was something open and unguarded that it had probably taken him years to allow in any direction. I thought about the burgundy dress, still hanging in my closet. I thought about a bar on a Thursday night, and a card on hotel stationery, and a man who'd sent his answer through someone else because he preferred to know the outcome first. I thought about all the ways I'd told myself I was making temporary decisions while making permanent ones. "Yes," I said. He didn't smile, not the way most people do, wide and immediate. The smile came slowly, reshaping his face from the inside out, and it was the most unguarded thing I had ever seen him do, and it was worth every complicated, frightening, irreversible step it had taken to get here. He pressed his lips to my hair, held me with a stillness that had nothing careful about it anymore. Just present, just real, just the particular weight of someone who has decided you are worth every wall he spent years building and every one he has quietly taken down. The coffee finished brewing. Neither of us moved to pour it. Outside, Chicago kept going, indifferent, luminous, enormous, and unbothered. And inside, in an apartment on the 14th floor, with south-facing windows and bookshelves that looked genuinely used, Isabella understood that she had not ended up here by accident. She had arrived by 10,000 small choices, each one more honest than the last, beginning with a burgundy dress she'd worn for the wrong man on a night that turned out to be exactly right. She didn't need the card anymore. She already knew what she was.